My name is Agnes Drayton, and at that dinner table, I was nothing. Not because I failed, not because I hadn't lived, or loved, or lost, but because somewhere along the years, my family decided I wasn't worth listening to. I was quiet, I didn't show off, and I never corrected their assumptions. That made me invisible to them, and in their minds, irrelevant. It was a family dinner, a reunion, technically, but it felt more like a scorecard review. My sister, the surgeon, my brother, the hedge fund guy, my mother, still running the social calendar like she was president of something, and me? Well, I was the sweet one who teaches somewhere, as they put it, when they acknowledged me at all. They seated me on the far end of the table, next to the kids and two empty chairs. One of those was soon filled by a guest of honor, Father Kinley, our old parish priest, who had been invited to bless the food and say a few kind words about the family. Everyone beamed when he arrived, except me. I just folded my napkin and waited, because I knew something they didn't. And by the end of that meal, every smug smile in that room would falter. They had no idea who I really was. But someone at that table did. When I was 12, I learned how to disappear without leaving the room. My sister Evelyn had just won her regional science fair with a project I'd secretly helped her build. I'd soldered the wires, run the test trials, even cleaned up the mess when it malfunctioned. But when the family gathered for dinner that night, they toasted to her brilliance like I didn't exist. "You've always had the brains in this family," my mother had said, beaming at her. No one asked how she pulled it off in our shared bedroom without lifting a soldering iron. That night, I didn't argue. I just swallowed the silence and kept smiling. Decades later, not much had changed. At that long mahogany table, I watched the same dynamics play out, polished adults now, but just as practiced in their hierarchies. Evelyn sat beside my mother, her voice a little too loud when describing a tricky gallbladder removal. My brother Marcus chimed in with a comment about market shifts, using terms like equity swing and early liquidation, like he was speaking scripture. My mother hung on every word, and me? I sat quietly near the end, 2 seats away from the serving dishes and a lifetime away from their expectations. It wasn't that I hadn't accomplished anything, but I had long stopped trying to present my life in ways that would impress people who never cared to ask in the first place. To them, I was a vague outline. Agnes the teacher, maybe still single, probably still renting, definitely not successful. They always made room for Evelyn's husband, even if he never looked up from his phone. They fetched Marcus a special chair because of his old back injury, which no doctor ever confirmed. But I got the folding seat, the one that tilted slightly, the one no one else wanted. I noticed. I always noticed. The kids ran around the table laughing, and someone spilled cranberry sauce. A niece I barely knew leaned over and whispered, "Mom said you're the one who lives with cats." I smiled because she wasn't being cruel, just repeating what she'd heard. And then came the real sting. My mother, mid-sip of her wine, glanced down the table and said to Father Kinley, "We're just so proud of all our children, of course. Evelyn saves lives. Marcus is reshaping retirement portfolios. And Agnes, well, she's doing something noble out there. Teaching, I think." She laughed like it was charming to forget. My fork paused in midair. Father Kinley's eyes flicked toward me. Not pity, not curiosity, something else. Recognition. I didn't flinch. I'd been through this before, enough times that it no longer cut like it used to. But that look in his eyes? That told me the silence wouldn't last forever. I looked down at my plate and thought of the children back in Northgate, the way they laughed when I taught them to plant seeds, how they waited by the fence for me every morning, arms open wide. I didn't need applause. But I wasn't ashamed either. The family might not see me, but someone did. And soon the room would too. When I left home at 22, no one stopped me. There was no dramatic goodbye, no arms flung around me, no promise to write. I packed 2 suitcases, left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "Thank you for everything. I need something else." And I boarded a bus heading 4 states south to a town most people wouldn't be able to find on a map. It was a place called Northgate. Small, tired, worn down in the way only places with too many empty porches and too few schools can be. But it had one thing I hadn't had in years: silence. Not the cold silence of judgment like I'd grown up with, but the quiet that left room to build something new. I started with tutoring. Kids whose parents were barely scraping by, whose shoes were too tight, whose lunches came in crumpled napkins. They didn't care that I didn't have a degree from Harvard or a family name that meant something. They just needed someone who saw them. One day, a boy named Elijah came in with a busted lip and no homework. He sat in the back and refused to speak. It took me weeks of showing up, of bringing him peanut butter sandwiches, of letting him sit in silence until he finally asked me, "Miss Agnes, do you think people like me get to grow up?" That question broke me open. That week, I walked into a county office with a folder full of scribbled ideas and asked what it would take to open a home. Something small, safe, consistent. They gave me forms, warnings, skepticism. I filled out everything anyway. It started with a rented house on the edge of town and 3 children. I slept on a cot in the hallway because we didn't have enough rooms. I stretched every dollar, bartered with farmers for produce, fixed plumbing with YouTube videos. There were days we had power but no hot water, nights we had bread and soup and laughter, and that was enough. I didn't post about it. I didn't call my family. I wasn't hiding it out of shame. I just didn't want their voices muddying something that, for once, felt clear. And slowly, it grew. Donations came in, not large, but steady. A retired carpenter offered to build bunk beds. A widow dropped off boxes of clothes every winter. A girl who used to sell lemonade on my porch came back as a volunteer during college. 12 years passed like that. I didn't marry. I didn't buy a house of my own. Every dollar I didn't need went into what we began calling the nest. A quiet name for a quiet place. And then, one spring Sunday, a young man in a collar came walking through the gate. I didn't recognize him at first, but when he smiled, I saw the boy behind the eyes. "Elijah," I said, breath caught in my throat. He hugged me, taller than I remembered, voice steadier. "I finished seminary, got assigned to St. Catherine's just 2 towns over. I wanted to see if you were still here." He sat with me on the porch that afternoon and listened as the kids inside painted cardboard wings for a craft project. He didn't say much, but before he left, he took my hand and said, "I'll come when it's time." I didn't know what he meant, not until I received the invitation from my mother months later. A family dinner, formal attire, RSVP requested. I almost ignored it. But something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe something older, said yes. And so, on a cool autumn evening, I stood outside my childhood home, facing a door I'd left behind over a decade ago. Inside were people who hadn't asked where I'd gone, who didn't know who I had become. But inside was also Elijah. And maybe, just maybe, it was time they learned what he already knew. The first thing I noticed when I walked into the dining room was that nothing had changed. Same cream-colored wallpaper with tiny faded flowers, same chandelier that flickered when the dishwasher ran. The same long table, polished but worn at the corners, set for 12 but clearly arranged by hierarchy. My seat was at the far end, again. Not close enough to the wine, not far enough to be unseen. Just enough to be sidelined. Evelyn stood near the entryway in a cream-sheath dress, clutching a wineglass like it was an accessory. "Agnes," she said, her voice too bright, "you made it. We weren't sure you'd come this time." "I RSVP'd," I replied calmly, removing my coat. "Yes, but you know—" She trailed off, glancing toward our mother. My mother appeared from the kitchen, all pearls and tension. "Well, there you are. Sit, dear. Evelyn brought a quinoa salad, and Marcus is bringing updates from Wall Street." I nodded. No hugs, no warmth, just seating arrangements and salads. Marcus arrived late, of course. He always did, because it gave him a chance to make an entrance. He was already talking on the phone when he walked in, using that sharp-edged tone reserved for interns and siblings alike. Dinner began with toasts and chatter. Evelyn launched into a story about a complicated surgery she performed, complete with dramatic pauses and modest shrugs. Our mother hung on every word, eyes glassy with pride. Marcus followed with market predictions and jargon-laced anecdotes about pre-IPO maneuvering and acquisition strategies. I ate my roasted chicken in silence. At one point, Evelyn turned to me and said sweetly, "Still teaching, Aggie? Or did you finally get that online certificate you mentioned a few years ago?" I smiled. "I still teach." "That's nice," she replied, and returned to telling Father Kinley about her recent trip to Switzerland. The priest sat across from me. He said little, but watched everything. A young niece asked if I had any children. Before I could answer, my mother interjected, "Agnes never really prioritized that sort of thing. She's always been very practical. Too practical, maybe." Everyone chuckled. I dabbed the corner of my mouth with a napkin. Children require more than just wanting them. My mother raised an eyebrow. "Is that one of your classroom quotes?" "It's something I've learned." Then came dessert. Mini tarts arranged on a crystal platter. Store-bought, I could tell. Marcus reached for two. Evelyn reminded everyone she was cutting carbs but might indulge, and I helped pass the plates without comment. As we waited for coffee, my mother stood. "We're honored to have Father Kinley here tonight. He's done so much for the parish, and we're lucky to call him part of the family." There were murmurs of agreement, glasses lifted in his direction. He rose slowly, smoothing the front of his coat. "Thank you, Mrs. Drayton. It's been a privilege to watch so many families grow, and to see the quiet work done in places most people overlook." A pause. He continued, voice calm but firm. "Tonight, I'd like to share something not about me, but about someone at this table." Evelyn straightened in her seat. Marcus leaned forward. My mother beamed. "But then," Father Kinley said, "there is a woman here who has given 12 years of her life to children with no one else, who turned a rundown house into a safe haven, who chose kindness over recognition, and who taught me personally what it means to be loved without condition." A hush fell over the table. He looked directly at me. "Agnes Drayton," he said, "is the founder and sole funder of Northgate Nest, our town's orphanage, which has raised more than 60 children since it began." Evelyn's fork clattered against her plate. My mother's face went pale. Marcus muttered, "Wait, what?" But I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, letting the silence stretch. Because for the first time in my life, they were finally looking at me, and they didn't know what to say. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the silence that followed. No one moved. Not a clink of silverware, not a polite cough. Just stunned. Still bodies around a table that had suddenly become unfamiliar. It was Marcus who broke first. "That orphanage? The Nest? On Route 9? Father Kinley nodded. "Agnes started it 12 years ago. She's been running and funding it quietly ever since." Evelyn laughed awkwardly. "I thought that place was some government program." I looked at her. "We tried that, but the system doesn't bend for children without paperwork, so we made our own way." My mother stared at me. "You never told us." "You never asked." That landed harder than anything else could have. She flinched, just slightly, but I saw it. Evelyn tried to regroup. "Why wouldn't you share something like that?" I met her eyes. "Because I spent years learning that what I did only mattered to you if it came with prestige. And this? This was never about that." Father Kinley's voice was quiet but certain. "The lives she's changed, the children she's raised. Agnes has built something far more lasting than accolades. She gave me a home when I didn't have one, and I'm not the only one." Marcus exhaled through his nose. "Well," he muttered, "guess we misjudged a little." "A little?" I said, not unkindly. The room didn't laugh. Eventually, someone passed around dessert, and conversation turned awkward. No one looked me in the eye, except the priest. My father stayed quiet. My mother's hands trembled when she refilled her glass. When I stood to leave, Evelyn followed me to the entryway. "You really did all that?" she asked, voice lower now, less performative. I nodded. "Yes." "And you never told anyone?" "I told the people who needed to know." Outside, the air was crisp. I walked alone to my car, past flower beds that hadn't been tended in years, and I realized something. I hadn't come back to be seen. I had come to finally stop hiding, and now there was nothing left to prove. I didn't look back when I walked to my car. There was no dramatic exit, no final glare over the shoulder, just the sound of gravel under my shoes and the deep, unmistakable calm of being done. Not angry, not broken, just done. The version of me they had clung to, the harmless one at the end of the table, the forgettable one with no story worth telling, no longer existed. Maybe she never had. Maybe she was just their invention, a placeholder they didn't bother to update. But that night, I didn't try to fix the record. I didn't demand correction. I had offered the truth. And they had heard it. Whether they could sit with it, that was their burden, not mine. The drive back to Northgate was long, but the road felt lighter this time. The weight I had carried home, the question of whether I had done enough, whether I was enough, never came back with me. I left it on their table, folded into the linen napkins between the silence. When I pulled into the nest's gravel lot, the porch lights were still on. The kids had gone to bed, but the warmth lingered. That house, old, drafty, cluttered with crayons and unmatched socks, was the only place I had ever truly been seen. Gemma was curled up on the couch in the common room, her small hand wrapped around a stuffed bear with a missing eye. She blinked when she saw me. "You came back." I smiled. "Of course I did. Did your family like us?" I sat beside her. "They didn't meet you." She tilted her head. "Why not? Sometimes people look straight at something and still can't see it." She nodded slowly, not quite understanding, but trusting me anyway. She leaned into my side and yawned. "It's okay. We see you." That simple sentence almost undid me. Later that night, I opened my inbox and saw an email from Evelyn. It had no greeting, no body, just a subject line. "I didn't know." I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed the laptop and turned off the light. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun was rising over the roof of the nest, casting long gold streaks across the dew-covered grass. I watered the herb garden out back while the house still slept, feeling the soft pull of soil between my fingers. No applause, no approval. Just this, the quiet joy of having built something real. They hadn't changed. Maybe they never would. But I had, and that was the shift they never saw coming. They called me nothing, not with harsh words, but with absence, with the way they skipped over me in conversation, the way they spoke about my life like it was a temporary thing I'd grow out of. To them, I was the quiet one, the odd one, the one who left and never quite came back whole. And for a long time, I let that version of me sit in their minds, untouched and uncorrected. Not because I agreed, but because I knew they wouldn't really hear the truth if I spoke it. So I stopped trying to be seen by them, and I started building a life outside their reach. They never saw the real work. The nights I carried feverish children to the ER with my own car and no health insurance. The winters I rationed space heaters and soup. The summers I found hand-me-downs that fit just right and made a child feel, for one day, like they belonged in the world. And when the truth finally came out, I didn't lift my chin or ask for their praise. I simply let it sit in the room like I had, all these years, quiet, present, undeniable. I returned home to the nest with no expectation that anything would change. Because the thing that mattered most already had me. I'm not who they remember. I'm who I chose to become. They called me nothing, and I let them. Because I was too busy becoming someone who didn't need to be called anything at all. Someone whose work spoke loud enough to stand in every room I didn't. And that, I've learned, is more than enough.